Hey guys, welcome to Southern Girl True Crime, where we feature missing persons, cold cases, unsolved cases, solved cases, and more. And today I have, we're going to kind of go down a rabbit hole. Well, we're not going to go down a rabbit hole, but we're going to take a look at a gentleman who, in my opinion, has went down a deep rabbit hole. Concerning the serial killer Ed Edwards. Now, you may have heard of Ed Edwards, you may not have, so I will give you information on Edwards. And this gentleman, he's a retired detective that has some very interesting theories on some of the people that Ed Edwards may have killed. Just an example, he claims that Mr. Edwards may have been responsible for the deaths of such people as JonBenet Ramsey, Lacey Peterson, Moxley, the Black Dahlia. Now, if Ed Edwards had been responsible for the killing of the Black Dahlia, he would have been 13 years old at the time. Now, I'm not saying that a 13-year-old can't kill somebody, but just seems a little highly unlikely in my opinion. But anyway, we will get into that. I will give you information on this detective and Ed Edwards, but as always, before we begin, I have a missing persons I want to bring to you. This is from neverforgottenarkansas.org, which is the Arkansas Missing Persons Database. And today's missing person is Najala M. Arashid. And she is only 15 years old. She is a black female, 5'5", 220 pounds, with brown eyes and black hair. She went missing on March 20th of this year, so it is a fresh case. So that's why I wanted to get this information out as soon as possible to try to do our little part here on our little channel to get this information out and hopefully try to generate some tips, leads, and just most importantly, get the information out there. She went missing from Little Rock. Alias names, Najala Arashid and Najala Arashid. She has scars on her left and right wrists. And here is a photo of Najala. Very beautiful girl. So it is very important to get this information out. Please, I will put a link to this in the description section so you can share it. Social media, friends, family, any true crime groups you may be in. Just please help get this information out about this young girl so we can hopefully have a good outcome and bring her home. And if you do have any information on Najala, you can contact the Little Rock Police Department at 501-371-4605. Alright, with that very important information taken care of, we will first take a look at Mr. John A. Cameron. Now, this is the gentleman. Let me give you his information first. John A. Cameron is a 55-year-old retired police detective from Great Falls, Montana. His career in law enforcement began in 1979. He retired in 2005 as a sergeant of detectives working cold cases. He has worked on FBI serial killer task force, catching ritualistic child cannibal killer Nathan Bar-Jonah. His cases have been featured on America's Most Wanted, Dateline NBC, and he helped produce a series known as Most Evil on True TV. In 2010, while working as an analyst for the Montana Board of Pardons and Parole in Deer Lodge Prison, Montana, he was in a position to access information that had been kept secret for 55 years, unraveling the most intelligent serial killer ever. And I'm assuming that he's talking about the Ed Edwards. A little about him. He was born in Duluth, Minnesota in 1961. He graduated Denfield High School in 1979. He is a graduate of Alexandria, Minnesota Law Enforcement Academy in August of 1981. He was hired by the Great Falls Police in 1981 and retired at the rank of sergeant in 2005. He went to work in 2008 for the Montana Board of Pardons and Parole in Deer Lodge Prison as a parole board analyst. It was in this position that I, meaning him, befriended serial killer Edward Wayne Edwards. Hold on just a second. So sorry. I have my allergies are wreaking havoc on me, and just had to take care of a little business. Anyway, education, 1979 to 81, graduate associate's degree in law enforcement, Alexandria Vocational Technical Institute in Alexandria, Minnesota. October 81, graduate basic law enforcement certificate, Montana Law Enforcement Academy in Bozeman, Montana. October 85, graduate intermediate law enforcement certificate, Montana Law Enforcement Academy, Bozeman, Montana. May 2008, graduate probation and parole officer academy, Montana Law Enforcement Academy in Helena, Montana. And hobbies, me playing a favorite Kansas song, Dust in the Wind. Well, that's a good song. I like that song. Alright, so that is the basic information on Mr. Cameron. So we'll have a little bit of an idea of his certifications. Alright, so now I'm going to give you, if you've never heard of Ed Edwards, I kind of heard of him. I actually first heard about him here on YouTube. There's a channel called Unsolved No More by Ken Maines. Is an excellent channel. I'll put a link to it in the description box. But Ken Maines is he did everything. He was a police officer. He was in the military. He's retired. He works. He worked cold cases. He was a cold case detective. He worked undercover. I said he's retired now. He started the organization called ASOC, which was an organization of lots of different cold case detectives, forensic pathologists, lots of famous names. You can look it up. If I can find it, I'll put a link in the description. But anyway, he is legit. And he actually did a video about this Mr. Cameron and Ed Edwards. And he gave his opinions about what he thinks of this. Very entertaining, very intelligent, very right on the mark. So I suggest you check it out. Alright, so we're going to go to who is Mr. Ed Edwards. And as always, this is from Wikipedia. Let me refresh just in case. Okay. And here's a picture of Mr. Edwards. Ed Edwards, serial killer. Edward Wayne Edwards was an American serial killer. Edwards escaped from jail in Akron, Ohio in 1955 and fled across country holding up gas stations. By 1961, he was on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list. And I'm just going to give you... Edwards was captured and arrested in Atlanta, Georgia on January 20th, 1962. After he was granted parole in 1967, Edwards killed at least 5 people between 1977 and 1996, and he is suspected of several additional killings. a little bit of his background. He was born in Akron, Ohio in 1933. He wrote in his biography that he grew up in an orphanage and that he was abused both physically and emotionally by nuns. He was allowed out of juvenile detention to join the U.S. Marines, but he eventually went AWOL and was dishonorably discharged. He traveled frequently during his 20s and 30s, working odd jobs such as ship docker, vacuum cleaner, retailer, and handyman. In 1955, he escaped from a jail in Akron and drifted around the country robbing gas stations. He wrote that he never disguised himself during these crimes because he wanted to be famous. Classic narcissist. He was placed on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list in 1961. After his 1962 capture, he was imprisoned in Leavenworth, from which he was paroled in 1967. He claimed that the influence of a benevolent guard at Leavenworth reformed him. He married and became a motivational speaker. He appeared on the television shows To Tell the Truth and What's My Line. He wrote an autobiography, The Metamorphosis of a Criminal, The True Life Story of Ed Edwards, in 1972. By 1982, he returned to crime and was imprisoned in Pennsylvania for 2 years for arson. Between 1974 and 2009, Edwards lived in more than a dozen different states when not incarcerated, according to his daughter April, using many false names. I found this interesting. In a 1993 letter to the FBI found in his papers, Edwards requested his criminal and history records for cities in 19 states, claimed that J. Edgar Hoover more or less gave me permission to proceed with his 1972 biography after I assured him there was nothing in it bad about the FBI. And he was writing a new book about criminals he met while incarcerated, such as Tony Provenzano, Charles Manson, and Jimmy Hoffa. Okay, arrest and conviction. In 2009, Edwards was arrested for M in Louisville, Kentucky. Neighbors described him as pleasant and neighborly, which that's not uncommon. A lot of friends and neighbors say, oh, he was, they were the nicest person ever, which is not the case. In 2010, he pled guilty to the murders of Billy Lavaco, 21, of Doylestown, Ohio, Judas Straub, 18, of Ohio, and Tim Hack, 19, and Kelly Drew, 19, both of Jefferson, Wisconsin. Soon after, in a jailhouse interview, Edwards confessed to killing his foster son, Danny Law Gleckner, 25, and in 2011, he was sentenced to death for that killing. Now, we'll get to his known murders, because like I said, he was no question that he was a serial killer. The first murders for which he was convicted took place in Ohio in 1977. William Billy Lavaco, 21, of Doylestown, Ohio, and his girlfriend Judith Straub, 18, had been dating 8 months when Straub's car was found in the parking lot of Silver Creek Metro Park on August 7th, 1977, and her purse and shoes were found inside. Family members gathered in the lot the next day as Norton police, aided by a National Guard helicopter, searched the high weeds. There they found Lavaco and Straub lying on the ground, shot at point-blank range with a 20-gauge shotgun. And Edwards received life sentences for these crimes in 2010. The second pair of murders, another double homicide, occurred in Concord, Wisconsin, in 1980 when Tim Hack and Kelly Drew were stabbed and strangled. These were referred to as the Sweetheart Murders. Now, I had heard of the Sweetheart Murders, but I had never really looked into them and didn't know that Edwards was the one responsible. Edwards had been questioned at the time, but there was no basis to hold him. Almost 29 years later, his connection to the crime was established by means of DNA testing. Edwards' own child, April Bellaccio, tipped off police about his possible involvement. Edwards confessed to the 1996 killing of his foster son, 25-year-old Danny Boy Edwards, in Burton, Ohio. The victim had lived with Edwards and his family for several years. Danny's original name was Danny Law Gleckner. Edwards killed Gleckner in a scheme to collect $250,000 insurance money. Danny Boy, a soldier in the U.S. Army, was persuaded by Edwards to go AWOL from the Army and taken by him to the woods near his house in Burton, Ohio. There, Edwards shot him twice in the face, killing him, and left his body in a shallow grave, where it was later discovered by a hunter. Edwards was sentenced to death for this crime in March of 2011, and he died in prison of natural causes a month later. So those are his known murders. Sorry, my light is not cooperating with me here. Okay. Now, other possible murders. According to Phil Stanford in his book, The Peyton Allen Files, Edwards may have been responsible for the murders of Beverly Allen and Larry Peyton in Portland, Oregon in 1960. 2 men were arrested and imprisoned for these murders, but released from prison early. Authorities maintain that the correct persons were prosecuted. In March of 2017, Detective Chad Garcia of the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, who was in charge of the Sweetheart Murders case, described how the killings of Hack and Drew were solved following a tip-off from Edwards' daughter. Garcia said he was pretty confident there are at least 5 to 7 more killings Edwards committed, and who knows beyond that. He gave a list of 15 confirmed and suspected victims, adding that he was less sure Edwards was involved in the Zodiac killings. Okay, here's when we come to Mr. John Cameron. Retired homicide detective John Cameron speculated that Edwards was responsible for several high-profile cases, including the Zodiac killings in the Bay Area of California and the killing of JonBenet Ramsey. However, his claims have proven highly controversial. I wonder why. Alright, Edwards died of natural causes at the Corrections Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio on April 7th, 2011, avoiding execution by lethal injection set for August 31st. Okay, I think that's, oh, here's a little bit more about Mr. Cameron. A former police detective and cold case investigator, J.A. Cameron, published a true crime book, It's Me, Edward Wayne Edwards, the Serial Killer You Never Heard Of, in 2014, claiming that along with other killings Edwards hadn't confessed to, that Edwards was the Zodiac Killer. The book and Cameron's claims were met with almost universal disdain, especially from law enforcement. No surprise there. Alright, so that is the basic information, or the information on who Edwards is. So now we will get into Mr. John Cameron and his going down the rabbit hole and his theories about other killings that he thinks Ed Edwards is responsible for. And so this article is from Rolling Stone magazine, and it is from April of 2018. And Inside One Man's Serial Killer Unification Theory. Trust me, you're gonna just say it's very interesting. And here's a picture of Ed Edwards once again. Okay. There is a lot to question about the wild theories raised on Paramount Network's new true crime series, It Was Him, The Many Murders of Ed Edwards. But let's get one thing straight. The sincerity of the man behind them, John A. Cameron, isn't one of them. Like I said, I have no doubt that Mr. Cameron truly, truly believes that his theories have some merit. Either that or he just wanted 15 minutes of fame. Either way. For the last 8 years, Cameron, a retired cold case detective, has sought to prove that Edward Wayne Edwards was the most prolific serial killer the world has never heard of. So first off, if he was this prolific serial killer and committed all these killings, how could law enforcement or anybody never hear of him? Unless he was the perfect serial killer, left no evidence behind, no witnesses, nothing. So that's the first red flag, in my opinion. He believes that Edwards committed upwards of 100 murders, killing some of the most famous victims of the last 70 years. 70 years. So that means he would have had to start when he was a baby killing people. JonBenet Ramsey, Lacey Peterson, Teresa Halbach, Adam Walsh, Chandra Levy, Jimmy Hoffa, Martha Moxley, Steve Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers, who, of course, the West Memphis 3 case, and the Black Dahlia. It was like I said, I'd read somewhere that if he had killed the Black Dahlia, he would have been something like 12 or 13 years old at the time. Cameron also believed that Edwards was the Zodiac Killer, who terrorized the Bay Area in the late 1960s, and that he was responsible for the Atlanta child murders, which I believe, if I remember correctly, they solved the Atlanta child murders. I could be wrong about that, so please in the comments let me know if I'm wrong. But I do believe that they found that killer. And yes, he is serious. Talking about Cameron, he is serious about all these theories. Cameron's theories, which he detailed in his 2014 book, It's Me, Edward Wayne Edwards, a Serial Killer You've Never Heard Of, have been met with almost universal disdain, especially from law enforcement, of which he was a member for 24 years. He's been labeled a crackpot and a conspiracy theorist. He's lost friends, colleagues, and his job. So there you go. That Edwards was a serial killer isn't in dispute. In 2010, the late con man confessed to killing 5 people, including 2 couples, Billy Lavaco and Judy Straub, in Ohio in 1977, Timothy Hack and Kelly Drew in Wisconsin in 1980, and his foster son Daniel Gleckner in Ohio in 1996. He wasn't caught for any of them until they had long gone cold. Then Edward's daughter ratted him out. Kids aren't stupid, April Blasio, Edward's daughter from his 4th marriage, told People earlier this year. She always knew there was something off about her dad's obsession with murder and the way he would move his family from city to city every few months. In 2009, she saw a news report about the newly reopened Hack-Drew murder case and realized that Edwards had worked at the venue where the couple was last seen alive. She also remembered that 2 days after the couple disappeared, Edwards announced that the family was moving again immediately. So naturally, that's a red flag. All right. Let me get a drink. Alright, sorry. Throat's getting a little bit dry. I was shaking, Bellagio told People. Immediately, I knew who it was that had committed the murders. Less than a year later, Edwards pleaded guilty to the 2 double killings and was sentenced to life in prison. He eventually confessed to killing Gleckner and was given the death penalty. Just a few months before his scheduled execution in 2011, he died on death row from natural causes. Cameron was already far down the rabbit hole by then. Initially, Edwards' 2 Lovers Lane double murders reminded him of one of his old cold cases, the killing of a Great Falls couple in 1956. After he confirmed that Edwards was in the area at the time, he assumed his old colleagues would be happy to take over. When I first started, I thought, well, it'll be easy. I'll just be able to get the real cops on board, Cameron tells Rolling Stone. But as time went on, I was really shunned, even by my local police department. I was called in and read my rights. I was told to stay out of it. So apparently, the police he went to didn't agree with his theories. He and Edwards began exchanging letters instead, and his theories started to snowball. Cameron quit his job with the state's parole board. Rather than give up the investigation, no one else would touch. Well, I wonder why no one else would touch it. He believes law enforcement didn't investigate Edwards any further because the serial killer was an informant, he claims, and made friends with police in every city he visited. Okay, so if he was this prolific serial killer, why would, in my opinion, authorities make friends with him and make him an informant if he was responsible for all these horrible crimes? Anyway, like I said, that's just my opinion. Continuing, over the course of 6 episodes, It Was Him takes a deep dive into just a handful of Cameron's most controversial theories. Along for the ride is Wayne Wolf, the show's co-producer, and Ed Edwards' grandson. Wolf only learned his grandpa was a serial killer a few years ago. So not only is Mr. Cameron going down the rabbit hole, he's pulling in Edwards' grandson into the madness, alleged madness. My mind was blown, Wolf tells Rolling Stone. My grandmother had been contacted by John a few years ago, and she had made him promise to never reach out to me or my father because she didn't want us to know. Unbeknownst to anyone in the family, she had been living in fear of Edwards all her life. Naturally. So apparently she suspected that Ed Edwards was not a very nice fellow. Each episode features interviews with law enforcement, journalists, and other experts with their own knowledge of the murders Cameron believes Edwards committed. Los Angeles Times journalist Larry Harnish, an expert on the Black Dahlia case, says he was shocked when producers asked him to appear on the series because he had written a blog post slamming Cameron's theory that Edwards killed Elizabeth Short, calling it a whole new level of absurdity. Exactly, in my opinion. I told the producer, look, this is crazy, Harnish tells Rolling Stone, and that's what I'm going to say. They said, go ahead, call it like you see it. At some point, I was told that in some of the other interviews that he did with law enforcement people, they were a lot more blunt and impolite than I was. Of all his theories, Cameron's belief that Edwards killed the young woman dubbed the Black Dahlia is his most outlandish. The 22-year-old waitress's mutilated body was found in January of 1947, having been severed at the waist and drained of blood. The LAPD investigated the possibility that Short was murdered by a surgeon or someone with extensive medical knowledge. Ed Edwards would have been just 13 years old at the time and never received more than a 6th grade education. So therefore, he did not fit the profile of who they thought killed the Black Dahlia. There's also no reputable evidence that Edwards and Short knew each other. Cameron's proof is a series of photo booth pictures of Short with a young man, not a teen, who looks nothing like Edwards at any age. Cameron's primary source material for his Black Dahlia theory is a 15-year-old website which kept showing up when he was doing research, he says. Cameron believes that Edwards was the author of the website, and the third-person narrative, fingering a fictional suspect named Ed Burns, is meant to be a coded confession. As soon as he mentions the site on the show's 5th episode, Harnish couldn't hold back a laugh. Well, I probably wouldn't have been able to hold it back either. When I heard that his research consisted of Google, I thought, oh no, Harnish tells Rolling Stone. His so-called source material is just bonkers. It's really flying saucer and men from Mars stuff. I kind of feel sorry for him. In sitting down and talking to him, there was no question in my mind, does he believe everything he says? Yes, he does. Is he terribly, terribly wrong? Yes, he is terribly, terribly wrong. It's easy to understand how Cameron became so fascinated with Edwards, who was a legitimately brilliant con artist. In 1972, he published his autobiography, Metamorphosis of a Criminal, the true life story of Ed Edwards, which detailed his troubled childhood, entry into a life of crime, and the prison guard who inspired him to clean up his act. Edwards marketed the book as a tale of reform, touring the country as a speaker and claiming to be on the straight and narrow. He even released a motivational album used for the opening credits of It Was Him and appeared on the ABC game show To Tell the Truth. By the early 70s, Edwards was on his 4th wife and had several more children, the picture of a reformed convict-turned-family man. Then, 5 years after the book was published, Edwards committed his first confirmed killing. According to Cameron, A Metamorphosis of Criminal is hiding many more. His book was a blueprint for all the killing he had done and all the cities that he had killed in, he tells Rolling Stone. Cameron believes Edwards wrote about the murders indirectly. The names he uses for different characters are linked to Edwards' victims, he says, and seemingly innocuous anecdotes contain references to how the killings were committed. That's really what the book was, Cameron agrees. It was the Zodiac Killer taunting everybody with who he really was to see if somebody would follow his trail. Cameron's belief that Edwards is the Zodiac Killer is central to many of his other theories. On its own, it's not plausible. The Zodiac claimed responsibility for 37 killings, but he's only been officially linked to attacks on 3 couples and a taxi driver in Northern California from 1968 to 1969. There's some evidence that Edwards was in the area during those years, and the Zodiac, like Edwards, may have served time at Deer Lodge Prison in Montana. Bellagio has said her father was obsessed with the Zodiac case and remembers him watching news coverage and yelling, "That's not how it happened." Creepy, but Edwards wouldn't be the first person, killer or not, to be obsessed with the Zodiac case. And yes, that is one of the most analyzed, discussed cases ever. And here is The letter note supposedly written by the Zodiac Killer. Cameron often says he just follows the evidence, but he also embellishes the facts to fit his theories. Therein lies one of the problems. For example, on It Was Him, Cameron goes on and on about the craftsmanship of the black executioner's hood the Zodiac wore during his third attack. Cameron describes the hood as being made of leather with intricate stitching around the cross symbol on its front. While in prison, Edwards was trained in leatherwork, ergo, Ed Edwards must have made the ornate leather hood, Cameron concludes. Well, of course, because nobody else can do leatherwork, apparently. Except there is no evidence that the Zodiac's hood was made of leather. The costume was never found, and the only description on record did not indicate what kind of material it was fashioned out of. A sketch artist's official rendering doesn't include any of the decorative details that Cameron seems to have imagined. So there you go. Some of his investigative methods also lack validity. Cameron's claim that a cryptographer friend cracked the Zodiac's infamous 13-character "My Name Is" cipher is too dizzying to follow, but in short, Edwards fits perfectly. You just have to know his name in order to solve it, he says. This method of working backwards to solve a cryptogram has worked for other sleuths too. Cameron is not the first to believe he has cracked the Zodiac's code with this strategy, nor is Edwards' name the first to fit. Cameron contends that Edwards and the Zodiac share the same MO because they both killed couples, but Edwards assaulted at least one of his victims, while the Zodiac's crimes had no sadosexual elements. Besides, Cameron's overarching theory is that Edwards targeted not just couples, but also single women and men, whole families and children, regardless of race or age, and used a variety of kill methods, and he basically had no MO. Alright, Cameron's Zodiac theory has fueled many of his others, a spiraling tornado of confirmation bias, sweeping up any case that contains some resemblance. To Cameron, a mysterious note or letter seems to always be a sign from the Edwards Zodiac Killer. See, in every legitimate law enforcement, anybody with any training has said somebody you can make anything fit any crime. If you work hard enough and go down rabbit holes and all this, you can make any person fit be any crime. It just astounds me. Alright, like the bizarre rambling ransom note in the JonBenet Ramsey case, according to Cameron, the signature SBTC stands for signed by the cross, i.e. the Zodiac cross, while the text contains a quote similar to one from the movie Dirty Harry, which is loosely based on the Zodiac case. That's something I never knew. I learn something new every day. The ransom note also contains a quote from the movie Speed, but Cameron doesn't link Keanu to the crime. Well, thank goodness for that. They better leave Keanu alone. He didn't have nothing to do with nothing. I'm a big Keanu Reeves fan. Or the letter that was sent to a Modesto Bee reporter in 2003 claiming responsibility for the killing of Lacey Peterson and for framing her husband Scott. Absent any overt Zodiac references, Cameron homes in on the word me, which is in parentheses. When an M is turned on its side, Cameron goes on, it looks like a capital E, therefore me is actually EE or Edwards' initials. Really? I mean, This whole thing is stretching it, but that's really stretching it. Okay. He was into crimes of recognition, Cameron tells Rolling Stone. He would create these horrific murders where he would frame somebody, it would be a press sensation, and then he could just sit back and read the paper every day about his murder. He didn't need to be the guy that was finally identified and say, "Yep, it's me, I'm the Zodiac." He wanted to die and continue to kill in his afterlife with the people he framed. Okay, let me read this again so I understand it. He wanted to die and continue to kill in his afterlife with the people he framed. Okay. Moving on. Often, Cameron says, Edwards' targets were the people he framed, and the murders were just a means to an end. Like Stephen Avery, who Cameron believes Edwards resented for getting so much attention following his 2003 exoneration for assault. Cameron claims Edwards killed Teresa Halbach just so he could frame Avery for the crime. His efforts to reach Kathleen Zellner, Avery's attorney, have been unsuccessful, but reached by email, she did give Rolling Stone her decidedly unfiltered perspective on his theory. I have had nightmares that make more sense. Sorry. Zellner tells Rolling Stone. Edwards would not have had the opportunity to kill Teresa Halbach. She would not have pulled over for him. He did not have her scheduled that day to know where she would be at a particular time. Edwards did not have access to or familiarity with the Avery property to plant the evidence. At age 72, he was too old and infirm to have committed this crime. The Edwards theory is a convenient, wishful thinking placebo, and not the hard, cold reality of actually performing the painstaking work necessary to solve a murder. Absolutely. Those are harsh words, but they are also unlikely to change Cameron's mind. It's as if Cameron's perception has become distorted, so that if he stares at a case long and hard enough, like one of those magic eye pictures, he'll see Edwards. In many ways, he is one of Edwards' victims too. And that is the sad part of this. If this gentleman, Mr. Cameron, truly believes that Ed Edwards is responsible for all these crimes, he has been sucked into this rabbit hole and has apparently been not able to escape it, which is very sad. All right. After going through the entire show and being able to reflect and think about everything, it's definitely given me more of a respect for John, Wolfe tells Rolling Stone. I didn't understand the type of PTSD that could come from dealing with Ed, and he had been dealing with it for years. Well, I don't believe he has PTSD. I don't know. He could. I mean, if he truly believes that Edwards is responsible for all these murders, in my opinion, I think he's just, I don't know, maybe had some kind of mental break or something, or just has convinced himself that all this is true. Like I said, in any case, it's sad. Cameron isn't alone in his belief that Edwards killed many more people. Detective Chad Garcia, who was in charge of the Hack Drew cold case, told the Daily Jefferson County Union that he thinks Edward killed at least 5 to 7 more people. Garcia used Edwards' autobiography as one of several sources for a timeline of other unsolved murders that he might have committed. One of those cases, the 1960 stabbing deaths of Larry Payton and Beverly Allen in Portland, Oregon, is featured in the final episode of It Was Him. Unlike many of the other cases, this one has actual hard evidence. Edwards was seen hanging around the crime scene and had a bullet wound in his arm that police suspected was related to a bullet hole in the couple's windshield. Police even arrested him, but he escaped before he could be questioned, and for some reason they didn't pursue him. Meanwhile, 2 other men were convicted for the killings and sentenced to life in prison, but they were both released within just a few years without explanation. Both had long insisted that they were innocent. Cameron hopes to officially exonerate them. This is one theory that Cameron may actually be right about, and he makes a compelling argument for why the Peyton Allen case should be re-examined. Unfortunately, the factual inaccuracies, bias confirming investigative methods, cherry-picked evidence, and dangerously questionable logic throughout the rest of It Was Him may have destroyed Cameron's best and maybe last shot at being taken seriously. And that is the sad part right there, too. If his actions may have destroyed any hope of finding the real killers of that case. Okay, I think we finally reached the end of that. So that is the story of Mr. Cameron, who believes that Edwards was responsible for the killing of all these people, from JonBenet Ramsey, Lacey Peterson, Adam Walsh, the West Memphis Three, Martha Moxley, the Black Dahlia. So, very interesting. Very rabbit holey. We went down a big, long rabbit hole on this one. Or we didn't. We just examined the rabbit hole that Mr. Cameron went down. I would love to hear your thoughts on this, so please leave your comments. Just please be respectful. Let's not get into any name calling and such as that. Just have a nice, intelligent comments and conversations. Alright, so this was a long one, but I found it interesting, and I hope you did too. If you like it, please like the video. If you like what we do here at Southern Gal True Crime, please do subscribe. Hit the bell so you get notifications of when I upload new videos. I try to upload at least 3 times a week, and then usually try to have some extra stuff on the weekends. Please like and share our videos. Most importantly, our missing persons and unsolved case features, because that is the most important thing that I want to do here on my little channel, is to try to get information and awareness out on the missing persons and unsolved cases that don't get the attention that these bigger national cases get. So please, I would appreciate if you would share them. Okay, so until next time, please take care of yourselves, be safe out there, and I'll see you next time.